Story 1. Silence makes me anxious. I leave the television on at a low volume to drown out the noise in my brain. Story 2. Background noise. If at any moment there is dead silence that I am not actively seeking, the anxiety and depression voices start. Story 3. It keeps the dogs from reacting to every outside noise or the squeak of the house. At night, it keeps my post-traumatic stress disorder from reacting the same way. Essentially white noise. Story 4. Body doubling makes it easier to concentrate for many people with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Story 5. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder helps me concentrate on my work. Don't be so judgmental, you guys. Story 6. I'm lonely. A television in the background and occasionally seeing another human face make me feel less alone. Story 7. Many people cannot tolerate being alone. The voices of people on television fill that void and provide comfort. Others simply dislike silence and need some kind of noise, whether television, radio, or something else. Story 8. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder has entered the chat. I have to have something else in the periphery, otherwise I get distracted by other things. Story 9. They do it to have background noise and for no other reason. I do not do it, but my parents always have, so it does not bother me. Story 10. For people with neurodivergence and attention deficit disorder, background noise and motion help calm the mind. Story 11. If there is no sound, I am left alone with my thoughts, and they take me to dark places. Story 12. Some people can't handle silence because it makes them think too much. Story 13. I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I solve problems for a living. Rubber duck debugging and fridge logic are greatly enhanced by having something distract me semi-regularly. Story 14. Background noise like a white noise machine, but I do not have one. Story 15. For people who live alone, I guess it is just for company. Background noise to stop it being so damned quiet. Story 16. If it is too quiet, my brain is not. That makes it hard to focus on whatever I am trying to do. But if there is too much noise, it causes the same problem. Having the television on low volume in the background helps. If it is cartoons, my children can stop by and take a break from playing, and I can clean without interruption. Story 17. I keep my ears company. I have to occupy 90% of my brain so the remaining 10% can focus. If the whole brain is left to its own devices, it runs around the empty space yelling about how much room there is for activities. Television, a podcast, or an audiobook. Anything I know well enough to ignore when necessary but engaging enough to draw my background attention away from mentally doodling. Story 18. Ambience. I live alone, and it makes my home feel less empty. Story 19. I cannot handle silence, and my external hard drive containing all my music is broken. Story 20. If I'm not actively watching, I'm at least trying to listen. But sometimes, even if I know I won't be able to follow the whole video, I'll put on something from a YouTube channel I like just to give them more watch time. Story 21. Sometimes I put on 8 of your nature streams for ambience. My cat loves them. Story 22. Background noise gives my brain a distraction that lets me work. I know that sounds dumb, but the background stimulation allows my work-focused brain to function while the part of my brain affected by attention deficit hyperactivity disorder that likes to chase squirrels listens to the noise. Story 23. Oh my God. I'm the complete opposite. Please be quiet. Dead silence is the way. Any sort of television sound, white noise, fans, battery charging, and so on gets on my last nerve after a short while. Story 24. It breaks the silence, which for me is a little unnerving at times. Story 25. I like hearing the sports news in the background. Is this my wife? Story 26. There is background noise, and the animals seem to enjoy watching cartoons and wildlife documentaries. Story 27. I often hear from people with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder that they are easily distracted, but I am the opposite. If the television is on, it distracts me from a conversation, my work, or a task I intend to complete. Funny how brains work. I am the only person I know who is like this. Story 28. My mom did it for background noise, especially when she was sleeping. Funny thing was, if you turn the television off, she would wake up and say, "I was watching that." "You were watching Crossing Over?" "Oh." I tend to run a fan or use a white noise machine if I need something to stop me from hearing my ears. Story 29. I can't stand the silence because of tinnitus. Noise helps. Story 30. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder feels similar to sitting in a cafe, body doubling, or having music in the background. But it has to be something I am not following or can pop in and out of, like a football game or a movie I have already seen, or an easy television show that does not need a lot of concentration. Now that I am older, I am picky about the sound. Intense action music or yelling, even if I am not really listening, is not good for my system. I am grateful for streaming, which lets me choose what fits my mood. Story 31. I leave it on when I'm not home for my dog. It helps drown out the noise from outside so he isn't as scared or nervous. Story 32. I have a friend who is very uncomfortable with silence. His thoughts intrude, causing anxiety to the point of paranoia. Story 33. It drowns out thoughts. At my station, when the television was on, people were irritated if I muted the commercials. A coworker and I were reading the newspaper. She never glanced at the television, so I turned it off. "Hey, I was watching that." I asked her what was on. Silence. Story 34. I grew up in a loud house. My mother babysat children and we had animals, so now that I am an adult and alone, it is comforting to have the television on. Listening to podcasts, playing music, or watching music videos while I cook, clean, or close my eyes helps me sink into relaxation. Story 35. My wife was like that, and it drove me nuts at first. Then she explained that television was her only source of entertainment when she was a child. Her parents worked full days, so she came home from school and was alone until the evening. Story 36. The sound of the television comforts me. I am kind of scared of my own thoughts. Story 37. Growing up, silence meant something bad was about to happen, so I learned to hate it. Story 38. Chiari malformation causes cerebrospinal fluid to back up in my brain and press on my eardrums, causing ringing in my ears. The ringing is like a background noise that is stuck in my head, so I like to have something to drown most of it out. Story 39. I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's a strange paradox that noise helps me sleep. I liken it to letting my brain focus on one thing like a toddler, which allows me to get some rest. Story 40. I leave the radio on National Public Radio in the kitchen all day. I work from home, so if I pop downstairs, I might catch a story. Also, it's important to me that my cats are well informed about the news cycle. Story 41. Background noise that happens to be relevant and interesting to me. I have it on the Consumer News and Business channel when I work from home. Aside from business news and updates, they almost always interview industry experts during the day. 1 minute, the Taco Bell chief executive officer is talking about why its latest taco flopped. The next minute, General Motors is explaining why China's electric vehicles are a threat. Story 42. I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. When there is no background noise, I cannot focus at all. My mind splits into a million different thoughts. But when I have a task and there is background noise, the forced split focus stops my mind from wandering. Story 43. I like having noise. My parents, especially my mother, always had a television on. It drives my wife crazy. Story 44. Because I like it, I usually watch something educational on YouTube. Story 45. A television's light burns out whether it is on or off. I like to have scenic screensavers play. People think someone is home when they hear the television and we are on vacation. Story 46. I used to do it when I was younger, just to have some background noise or to make sure I did not miss anything. That was long before streaming existed. Now I prefer silence. Story 47. I sometimes do this. My anxiety spikes when it is too quiet, and putting on a YouTube video or a podcast helps ease it a little. Story 48. If you have a very hyperactive brain, background noise can help calm it down and improve focus for some people. Story 49. I have it playing all the time, even while I sleep. I grew up in a chaotic, unhealthy household. Periods of silence used to make me uneasy, and as an adult, silence still feels unsettling. The sounds in movies, such as explosions, yelling, and screaming, help me sleep. Story 50. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder causes my brain to generate internal chatter that disrupts whatever I need to do. Story 51. Background noise helps me stay focused. I tend to put on random documentaries I can pop in and out of because they help with my attention deficit disorder. Story 52. I like background noise, and if it is not music, it would be the television. I do not want to be around my own brain when it is too quiet. Story 53. My grandmother always had the TV on. When we visited, if I walked through the room and it was on, I would turn it off because that is what you do when no one is watching. The next time she came through, she would turn it back on, even if she was only passing through. In my defense, I never messed with the thermostat. Story 54. When I was a child and experienced frequent insomnia, I would leave the television on as white noise so I would not feel so alone as the only person awake. I can see that being why older adults leave it on. I also wonder if it is sensory seeking. Without it, they feel understimulated. During my day, I often have podcasts or music playing and avoid sitting in silence. Story 55. I lived with my parents, then had roommates or girlfriends for 14 years. When I finally moved into my own place, it was eerily quiet. I tried playing music, but it was not enough. I noticed I felt less anxious when the TV was on, so I left it on until a girlfriend moved in. Story 56. I kind of feel like it is just background noise so the house does not feel dead. It is like having a pet that never stops making noise, laughing out loud. Story 57. Background noise helps with my tinnitus and anxiety disorder. Story 58. In the silence, I am painfully aware that I am a woman alone in my house. Having something calming on in the background makes me feel less vulnerable. My husband is very into true crime, so when he is home we watch many shows where women alone end up dead. When I am by myself, silence begins to feel like waiting to be in a horror movie. I am also jumpy because I have post-traumatic stress disorder. So the continuous sound of something relaxing on the television makes me startle less when a branch hits the window or a dog barks outside. Story 59. I grew up in a family with 4 siblings. Now that I am on my own, it is too quiet. The television provides the background noise I am used to. Story 60. It feels less lonely being plugged into a collective experience. Story 61. I grew up living with 5 other people in the house. My apartment is too quiet without a little noise. Story 62. My wife scans hundreds of channels every day and records more than we have time to watch. Story 63. Strangely, I'm planning a week without television and with minimal phone use starting Sunday. I fell into a deep depression with significant trauma following abuse, so I sometimes isolate myself and stay home. The television in the background is comforting but reinforces my unhealthy coping strategies. I will see how it goes by the end of next week. Story 64. It is usually how I watch baseball games. If there is an exciting play, I know I can catch the replay. Story 65. I play on a flat-screen television and have my laptop open for video game-related searches. Next to my desk I have 2 cathode ray tube televisions stacked on top of each other so my husband can play his PlayStation 2 and watch a video home system tape while we game together. Sometimes he turns them on and leaves the room. I have asked him not to leave those televisions on since I am not watching them and the extra lights and sounds make it harder for me to play. I assume he enjoys the extra noise and lights because he is a noise and electronics musician, which I find amusing. I do not enjoy it, and I always end up turning the cathode ray tube televisions off. Story 66. I am lonely, pathetic, and sad. The people on television are my only friends. Story 67. My dog freaks out if he thinks he can hear any noise outside the house. Story 68. My friend does it because the noise makes her feel less alone and safer. Story 69. I am an only child, so the television was my sibling while I was growing up. Story 70. Background noise. Sometimes we listen to the radio instead. My partner works nights, So I cannot sleep without the television on because I begin to feel like I hear things in my house and it scares me. If someone is in my house, I do not want to know. Story 71. Many people I know like background noise. Personally, I get up, go do something, and forget to turn it off. Story 72. I like having background noise. Silence feels cold, sterile, and unsettling to me. Story 73. My mother always had the television on as background noise. She did this from childhood because she was raised by an alcoholic, abusive mother who left her alone while she drank. The television gave her comfort when her mother would not, and she never stopped. Story 74. I want background noise to make the house feel less empty. My dogs need something to watch. Story 75. It turns out I had undiagnosed attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I needed the expected distraction to avoid unexpected brain chatter. Now that I am medicated, silence often feels genuine. Story 76. I need sensory information input. The alternative would be constant conversations with people, which feels unfair. Television provides an ideal form of information. Short segments broken into smaller pieces, which is perfect. People around me hate when I surf channels, so I usually keep music channels on. Story 77. My wife has insomnia and night terrors. If she wakes in a pitch-black room, it is disorienting and panic-inducing. Having the television on helps her know she is at home and safe. During the day, it is just background noise. Half the time it is in Roku screensaver mode for hours. Story 78. My dad turned the television on, left to go to the other side of the house, and then came back angry at me when I turned it off after an hour with no one watching. I'll gladly help pay for groceries, but I refuse to chip in on the power bill for that reason. They do the same with lights. Story 79. My husband grew up in a family that always had the television on, and when we married it stayed on in our home. I don't usually watch it. It's just background noise. It's strange without it. Story 80. I have panic attacks when there are sudden noises. The television helps by masking those sounds and reducing my startle response. It also helps if I can watch for 2 or 3 minutes in between, which is why I only watch series I already know in moments like this. Story 81. Not necessarily the television, but background noise keeps my mind clear. Otherwise, intrusive thoughts start, and those are not fun. Story 82. Like many respondents, background noise helps drown out my tinnitus. Unlike music, it keeps me visually engaged. Story 83. I got my son a 75-inch television for Christmas and mounted it on the wall. He plays games on his 40-inch television below it while watching YouTube. Story 84. I grew up an only child and was often alone in the house for hours. Television kept me company as a child and still does as an adult, even when others are home. It drives my wife nuts. She likes to sit in silence and read while I have the television on, watch YouTube on a laptop, and browse my phone. Story 85. My whole family does this. Every holiday gathering features an idiotic show on repeat all day, or a political program at another house where people shout hateful things on Christmas, for goodness sake. Story 86. My parents live with us and leave the TV on in their living area even when they are not home. It drives me crazy, so I turn it off. The TV is on from when they get up until they go to sleep. They even doom scroll while the TV is on, and my dad reads with it on. Story 87. For your information, my phone likely won't work during the next mega disaster. Story 88. My wife does it for background noise. I do not understand. I will not have the television on until the evening. Is hers on downstairs in the master bedroom and in the office? Story 89. Unfortunately, I do not have a work-from-home job, and neither does my wife. We have 2 miniature dachshunds that are very spoiled. So I leave the television on all day so they feel like people are with them. They have watched The Big Bang Theory, Young Sheldon, South Park, Game of Thrones, a fair portion of the series Emergency Room, Silicon Valley, and are currently watching Full House. Story 90. Some people do this for their pets when they are gone all day. Story 91. My brain requires overstimulation. If I am not trying to process 3 different feeds at once, it starts overthinking, and panic from the existential dread of this plane of existence sets in. Story 92. I grew up in the heart of a city with constant noise, so I'm used to it. Silence often came before something went wrong, so if I expect noise and instead hear silence, it makes me suspicious. Story 93. Background noise, especially when I'm working. It's the same reason I prefer cafes to silent study floors in libraries. I need background noise to help me think. Television shows also help me get through tedious tasks much faster. Story 94. Background noise. I do not do it, but that has always been why people do it, as far as I know. Story 95. In our 30s, we are all too busy to make time for friends like we did in college. I turn on Friends while I work and suddenly it feels less lonely, as if Joey is about to burst in and ask, "How you doing?" Story 96. My spouse has a brain injury, and having the television on soothes him. Story 97. I do not keep the television on, but I like having National Public Radio on all day because I can stay on top of the news and it keeps me company. This does not work when Donald Trump is president because he is extremely depressing, so I use podcasts and audiobooks instead. Story 98. I do not have it on all the time, but when I am doing mundane tasks it really helps. The background noise keeps my brain busy enough that I can focus on tasks that are incredibly boring and would otherwise distract me. Story 99. Less stress. Our smart television is not so smart, and connecting it to the high-definition multimedia interface is a pain in the ass. Story 100. Most of the time it is due to attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and having something on in the background helps me concentrate. Story 101. When I lived in a bad neighborhood, I would always keep my television and lights on whenever I went out to make it look like someone was home. Story 102. When your kids finally head off to school, the house becomes too quiet. It is not peaceful. It is creepy. I would rather have the television mumbling in the background than sit here listening to the refrigerator hum. Small town quiet feels different. Story 103. That's like leaving the refrigerator door open all day. It's a waste of energy. Story 104. I don't have it on for myself, but when my dogs are home alone, I leave dog training shows on. I figure at worst they'll see dogs, hear people, and feel less alone. At best they'll pick up some tips about being good dogs. Story 105. Assuming the original poster, who has perfect hearing, also has subtitles enabled around the clock. Story 106. There are many reasons, but one is that I am trying to get better at Spanish. Having Spanish shows playing in the background keeps the language switch in my brain active and makes it easier to flip between Spanish and English. Story 107. I would leave it on all day for the dog whenever we left the house or when I was working downstairs. We lost her about a month ago. Now I do it because I hate the quiet with her gone. Story 108. It's similar to having YouTube on in the background or music playing. The silence is filled with my own thoughts, which cycle. The background noise shuts off the overwhelming mental distractions just enough for me to focus. I need to shut off the dominant 20% of my brain that produces those thoughts to give room for the quieter 80% to work and take the spotlight. It also makes everything feel less empty sometimes. Story 109. It makes the room feel more alive, like there is actually more going on than there really is. Usually it cannot be anything very interesting, and lately it is easier than ever to find uninteresting content. A news channel used to be my first choice, but that became unbearable after a while, so now I play old sitcoms. The Simpsons, Family Guy, King of the Hill, and maybe Law and Order. Story 110. Hey, the dogs are bored and the cats love the National Geographic shows. Story 111. For everyone who says, background noise, why not just listen to music? Story 112. I want to cover up the noise from the neighbors. We have very thin walls, and I don't want to hear every conversation. Story 113. My dog enjoys stimulation when we are not nearby or are in another room. He just wants to be alone for a bit. Story 114. The same reason people keep the radio on is that they do not like silence. Story 115. To drown the silence. Back when I was a kid, I liked it when people talked, even if I didn't pay them any attention. The room felt dreadful and empty if I hadn't turned on the television. Story 116. Background noise helps me focus. My brain is usually very chaotic, so if something interesting happens, I will watch for a minute and then return to what I was doing. Story 117. Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. The background noise of my choosing quiets my brain. Story 118. Listening to media that follows a storyline keeps my spiraling, intrusive thoughts at bay. Story 119. Background noise and my cats when my wife and I leave for work. Story 120. I was the youngest in a large family, and the noise was constant day and night. Then everyone moved out almost at the same time, and the house became empty. I joined after-school activities and spent as much time with friends as possible. But when I was home alone, I could not stand the silence. Thank you, TV. Story 121. I'd rather listen to some slop than my own thoughts 24/7. Story 122. I leave my dog's favorite shows on. Right now, they are watching The Walking Dead Season 4. They enjoy anything with zombies, monsters, animals, fighting, or water scenes. Story 123. It is simply for background noise and dimmer lighting without using the ceiling light. I cannot tolerate complete silence because it becomes too loud. I even have an old fan running in the back to pair with it. Story 124. My partner uses it for background noise. I use it or have music on so I do not hear ringing. Story 125. My significant other does this. I have asked her several times why and received different answers. I strongly suspect it is related to her upbringing. She grew up around a lot of noise and constant stimulation. She needs background noise to feel normal. Story 126. I usually only do this during the Games Done quick marathons, so for about a week during each season. I keep it on because viewership supports the charity, and sometimes I notice something fun that I end up watching. It also helps me remember when the blocks I like to watch are on. Story 127. Mostly background noise. When it's just me at home, it feels too quiet. Story 128. There is background noise. I watch YouTube music videos on my television. Story 129. Prevents dogs from reacting to minor noises outside while you work from home. Story 130. I'm trying to silence the voices in my head with other voices so I can relax. Story 131. When I am working and need to get into the zone, I require something to actively tune out. White noise like a fan does not cut it. Story 132. How will my dogs watch their favorite shows if I turn the television off whenever I leave? Story 133. I do not leave the TV on, but having my second monitor play random essays and audiobooks is the same thing. I get bored in my own head. I do not want to think. My brain is like an amusement park on steroids. Story 134. For the reasons already mentioned, and also because of rebellion. My mother would not allow a television to be on in her house until the evening. She thought watching television all day was a sign of laziness. Story 135. They are lonely and need the company and distraction of noise and voices. Story 136. I experienced trauma from childhood neglect. I hate dead silence. The noise helps me feel less alone. It took me 48 years to realize why I do this. My therapist is the best. Story 137. I did that when I had to move into my first apartment after my dad died. Hearing the cast of Stargate in the background made me feel like I still had a family. Story 138. I like the television on just for background noise. My wife says it wastes too much electricity and turns it off. Story 139. There is background noise. Also, if I'm home alone, it feels like someone is home with me. Story 140. Because I can at least pretend that the noise or voice I heard just came from the television. The silence can be deafening. Story 141. A quiet documentary and a fan on low every night. My wife's kitten snores. Story 142. Background noise helps me focus. I went to an elementary school with cubicle walls for classrooms and grew up exposed to constant background noise. I can selectively tune out sound. Even in a room with 3 conversations happening around me, I can focus on any conversation and switch my attention at any time. Story 143. My parents are 63 and 65. My dad works nights, so my mom is often home alone because he sleeps during the day. This helps her not feel alone. Story 144. If I do not have sufficient stimulation, my brain will fill the gap with upsetting, distracting thoughts. It is best to have some background noise to prevent that. Story 145. I turn on the television when I have to go out, because otherwise my dog will chew the woodwork around the door jamb. Story 146. When I was little, our two rescue dogs would fight if they thought we were not home, so my parents left the television on for them. After those two passed, we got a new puppy and kept the television on. When I moved out, I got a cat and continued the habit. Now, when we are home, we are television people. If I am awake, it is on. I keep it on for the routine. Story 147. It is background activity, like when I bet on frivolous sports I never watch. It just exists. Story 148. I used to do it for my dog, so he would have something to watch and hear while I was at work. It helped him a lot with anxiety. Story 149. My wife does this because her father did. He was fanatical about turning off the lights when no one was in the room. Story 150. I just bought a new house. I plan to leave the large television on at night in the living room as a theft deterrent. Story 151. I do it to help YouTube channels I like. I leave their videos on replay so they get extra views. Story 152. I grew up in a busy, noisy house. A bit of background noise makes it feel like home and motivates me. Story 153. I listen to television, documentaries, college courses, and some sports games. I do not listen to radio because talk radio is inane, and I do not care for modern music. My television fills the void. Story 154. When I moved into my first apartment on my own, I turned it on to feel less alone. Story 155. I live alone but grew up in a very chaotic household with 5 siblings. The background noise is soothing. Story 156. Our rabbits like background noise because it distracts them from noisy neighbors. Silence punctuated by periodic loud noises frightens them. It is better to have a constant low level of sound. Story 157. I was diagnosed with the inattentive presentation of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I was advised to try this to improve my mental sense of time passing and to avoid zoning out. Televisions set to a low volume use very little energy, and half-hour intervals are helpful. Story 158. I used to do this because I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and it was basically white noise. Now I either listen to podcasts or follow a proper diet and supplement regimen that really helps me focus. Story 159. I have post-traumatic stress disorder, and the noise helps keep me calm and reduces my panic attacks. Story 160. I use this or music because I'm awake and it provides background noise rather than silence. It also helps in case you are talking and other people nearby could hear. It's not on when I'm not in my dorm room or at home, though, laughing out loud. You won't ever catch me falling asleep with a television playing, though. I don't know how people do that. I need absolute silence and no flashing lights. Please. Story 161. If the television is running, I cannot hear the freezer humming. Story 162. I rarely enjoy silence. I always have something on, whether it's television, radio, or an audiobook. I am currently being assessed for autism and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Laughing out loud. Story 163. I am alone most of the time, so it is nice to have some background noise. Story 164. It is my speaker for Spotify while I do the dishes, replace the garbage disposal, and so on. Story 165. Is it because silence is uncomfortable, or because it screens the noises outside that make me anxious, even though I know it's literally nothing? Story 166. It calms my dog while I work from home and cannot give her my full attention. Story 167. Background noise to drown out my neighbor's screaming children. Story 168. My mother used to do this. I think it was background noise for her. Story 169. My husband does it so he will not feel alone while tooling around the house. Story 170. I agree with many people about the background noise. I can multitask well, so even when I am not actively watching the television, I am often still taking in what is on the screen and what is being said. I can watch passively. My wife will call something out and I will explain the plot of whatever is on the television. It used to surprise her, but it no longer does. Story 171. I prefer the quiet. Roku has a fish tank screensaver that is nice when I am not watching anything, but it does not have sound. My 78-year-old mother leaves her television on 24/7 to keep the dog calm. Story 172. My brother only turns the television off when he goes to bed. He works on his laptop while his wife cooks the meals. You name it. Story 173. It is my emotional support television. I only have it on when I am working from home because my job is so boring you could die. Story 174. My wife leaves it on all day to entertain the dogs while we are at work. She turns it to Nickelodeon every morning before she leaves. Story 175. The screensaver rolls across the screen, providing a little extra light without turning on the lights. Story 176. I often need background noise, so I keep shows, movies, or music playing at work all day. Otherwise, I become more easily distracted. I dislike the TV being loud. I don't know. My brain is weird, I guess. Story 177. For my dog and cat. They like to listen while they nap after their hard work. Story 178. I used to be that person. It was to drown out my own thoughts. Oddly enough, since I cut my mother off, I don't need constant noise. Silence is actually beautiful. Story 179. Background noise. I prefer music in this situation, but my spouse watches television. Many people do not like sitting in silence. Story 180. When I do not have the TV on, my dog barks at every noise outside and drives me crazy. Story 181. I have the radio or a podcast on simply because my mind can handle more than the mundane tasks I'm doing. If I am writing or creating, I do it in silence. But if I'm cooking dinner or shoveling snow, my mind is in neutral, so I have to occupy it somehow. This background noise that keeps the voices in my head at bay. I imagine people with TVs on all day are the same way. My mother's family almost universally did it, and my grandmother on my father's side did too. It drives away loneliness. Story 182. I have an Apple TV with the Snoopy screensavers. They are fun to glance at. There is always something new that Snoopy and Woodstock are doing. Story 183. I am lonely, and the background noise makes me feel safe and comfortable, especially when people are talking on television. Story 184. Tinnitus. The beehive has to be overheard or the craziness will commence. Story 185. I do not like quiet spaces very much, and my family does not listen to music. I prefer noise all day. Story 186. Especially if it is Fox News. Why do you do this, sister-in-law? Story 187. I worked at a television station for 9 years and always kept the television on in my office to listen for dead silence. When it went silent, I would count 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. No sound. Run, we are off air. Story 188. This is not the same as leaving the television on, but my dad left the lights on in the workshop for over 15 years because he did not like the 1 or 2 second delay it took for the fluorescent bulbs to light up. Story 189. A quiet house makes me sad. Voices break the silence. Story 190. I like quiet, but years of apartment and multifamily living taught me I could not have it, so I learned to keep the television or music on. At least the noise was mine. Story 191. I like to feel like I am in an airport, so I have televisions all over the house tuned to the Weather Channel. Story 192. My parents-in-law do this. From 5:30 in the morning to 8:30 in the evening every day. They walk in the morning, take 2 naps, do yard work and similar activities, and keep the television on. Every month we were charged $50 for excess data usage. Story 193. I am somewhat autistic and having background noise helps keep my anxiety down. Story 194. The comforting sound of the television distracts me from the unbearable, screaming voice of existential dread in my mind. Story 195. Not the television. Music is almost always playing unless I happen to be watching it. Story 196. Background noise helps. I grew up in a family of people with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, so ambient sound is always useful. We have a dog now, and when we leave the house, we sometimes leave the TV on the weather channel so he is not in complete silence while we are gone. Story 197. I keep the fan on all year because it provides background noise, and I cannot sit in absolute silence. Story 198. Residual haunting. I can blame the television for unusual noises. Postscript. Do not move into a house with a history. Story 199. Sometimes it helps me focus. I work from home and I have a noisy husband. If he is at work or at school, the house starts feeling too quiet, laughing out loud. Story 200. Severe attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. If there is no background noise distracting one part of my brain, the other part cannot get any work done. Story 201. How do you know I have the television on all day? Do not tell me you are stalking me again. Laugh out loud. Story 202. My girlfriend does this. I'm pretty sure she uses it as white noise. Story 203. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and anxiety. I need multiple things going on at once to focus. In general, that quiets the voices in my head. If I ever feel very anxious or want to dissociate, I can glance at the television and focus on it. Story 204. Oh my God. My upstairs neighbor is a senior and he plays his television loudly all night. Sometimes it is music, which I do not mind because we are women in our 20s and sometimes we play music all night. His taste is different. His music is something I can enjoy, but he probably does not appreciate trap or heavy metal blasting through the night when we have an after-party here. We have an unspoken agreement not to file noise complaints. I do not mind the music, honestly, but the television blasting all night is very annoying. He sleeps on the couch in the living room, which is directly above my bedroom, laughing out loud. Story 205. I do it because it makes me feel accompanied. Sometimes I even watch YouTube videos with the television on. Story 206. I have tinnitus, so if I do not have background noise, I hear a constant high-pitched tone. It is a nightmare. Story 207. I guess it is for anxiety reasons. I prefer crowd sounds. I keep the television on a rotation of live and recorded streams of people walking around New York City, Chicago, and other big cities while working from home or when I am not actively watching something. I especially like the steady buzz of the crowd when people film themselves wandering around fan conventions for a few hours. I like to leave them on to fall asleep to. Story 208. I use sounds to drown out the ticking. I have artificial heart valves that make a ticking sound and an irregular heartbeat. The ticking triggers panic attacks because it makes me aware that my heart is not beating regularly. Having the television on helps prevent panic attacks. I even have to fall asleep with sounds on. I usually play a podcast or an audiobook. Story 209. Background noise distracts the part of my brain that wants to act in hurtful or even suicidal ways. Story 210. Dogs. Those idiots will bark at a squirrel jumping on the roof or a bunny chewing grass outside. The TV keeps the noise level up so they do not bark at the bogeyman. This is beneficial for them because it lets them sleep instead of staying on constant alert all day. Story 211. I have to keep the television on all night while I sleep. I can't explain why, but it is comforting to me. Story 212. The noise of my internal dialogue will drive any sane person mad. Story 213. There are several reasons. I do not like a quiet house. Background noise helps with my dogs barking at every little sound and keeps my mind busy. Story 214. I work from home and am alone all day. The voices make me feel like I am not alone in the house. Story 215. There are many reasons. Background noise helps. I have tinnitus, the ringing, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, so I need to tune out the thoughts spinning in my head. I also like it to sound as if someone is home, because we leave it on when we go out for the sake of my dogs. Story 216. There is a woman in our street who lost her husband a few years ago, and both her grown-up children have left home. Through the window of her house you can see her television on, and it seems to stay on for most of the day. Story 217. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder helps me focus, but after I moved off grid, I got very little done. Story 218. I do not watch television, but I have YouTube videos, audiobooks, or podcasts playing. Why? I had a family. My ex-partner ended the relationship and left, and now I live alone and feel lonely. When something speaks to me, it feels a little better. Story 219. The Office on a loop is my mental weighted blanket. Story 220. Being truly alone with my thoughts is a living nightmare. It is not good for my mental health to give the anxiety and depression voices room to roam. Can even be dangerous. Having the television, music, YouTube, podcasts, or audiobooks on is one of my coping mechanisms. The background noise drowns out distracting sounds and gives my brain something to focus on instead of turning to self-destructive behavior. I usually use earbuds so I do not bother others, and I almost always have some kind of background noise unless I want to focus on daydreaming. Story 221. I either need complete silence or some kind of sound. I have a house full of people and pets, so silence is usually a pretty tall order. I do not necessarily need the television on. Any music or a podcast will do. Story 222. Yep. Background noise. That's all. It's too quiet if you're alone moseying around with nothing but your thoughts. You need background noise, and anyone who keeps the TV on all the time has used music before. It's not the same. You start to get tired of songs you once loved. Add light and laugh tracks to your everyday background noise. It's easy. Unless you have a book to read, once you finish messing around, what are you going to do? Sit and watch the same TV that's been running in the background. Story 223. I have a framed TV so it looks like a painting of a zebra. Story 224. It's comforting to have the human conversation in the background. Story 225. It's comforting. I need noise, and I don't care for today's music. Story 226. I need noise in the background. I am neurodivergent, and silence drives me crazy. I start hearing things that are not there. Story 227. Anxiety. Just a dim light and low volume create a sense of security. I know someone who cannot sleep without the television on. Story 228. My husband cannot stand the silence. I, on the other hand, cannot stand the television being on while no one is watching it. Story 229. I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and I work much better with a television show or movie playing. It has to be something I have seen a million times or something so dumb I will not get interested in it. It seems to act as a relief valve to drain extra mental energy so I can focus on my work. I have watched entire series such as The Andy Griffith Show, Dragnet, and Adam 12, junky 1940s and 1950s horror movies, and older moral outrage films like Reefer Madness and Cocaine Fiends. Story 230. Sometimes silence is too loud. Television is just a way for the brain to say you are not alone. Story 231. I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Sometimes I need overstimulation to focus, while other times I am too overstimulated and cannot focus. I know it does not make sense. My brain is wacky. Story 232. Background noise to prevent the dogs from barking every time the wind blows outside. Story 233. When you are alone, television can help the brain feel like it is getting the social connection it needs. At least for me, this is true. It has helped on nights when I felt isolated. Story 234. My wife used to do this and it drove me nuts. She grew up in a home where her father sat in front of the television around the clock, getting stoned and drunk. The only time it was turned off was when he left to visit the trap house where he bought his drugs. Every time she left the room, I turned it off. She asked why, and I just said, "You weren't watching it." Mind you, this was a gigantic plasma screen and a Bose sound system that used enough energy to raise the room temperature 3 degrees. Also, I did not need to listen to another Stupid Friends rerun. Story 235. There is noise from the company, and the neighbor's dog barks a lot. Story 236. I live alone, and I have it on for background noise. Silence is deafening to me. I sleep with the television on. Story 237. I am not sure about the daytime, but at night I like to fall asleep. Usually I put on the Bob Ross painting channel. He is so talented at both painting and helping people fall asleep. Story 238. Frankly, so I can keep up in real time with what Trump messed up today. Story 239. So I'm not alone. It's either music or television, never silence. Story 240. I don't know why I do it, but I have been told it is often a symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder. I was thrown into a cabinet headfirst at age 6 and forced to stand on the stairs to a Michigan-style basement with the light off while my father banged on the door to scare me as punishment on multiple occasions, which is not normal. Story 241. I dated a girl who would start talking over the television show or movie we were watching, as if it were not even on. It drove me crazy. Then I met her parents. The television was always on in the living room, loud enough to be heard anywhere in the house, day and night. I wish I knew why. Story 242. I have to have it for background noise. I also have a box fan that I cannot live without. I hate silence. Story 243. Sometimes I keep nature documentaries on in the background. Story 244. Background noise. People do not know what to do with silence anymore. Sitting with oneself was once unavoidable, but that is no longer the case. We have literally changed our brains to constantly seek dopamine, increasing demand and making sitting in silence physically uncomfortable for some. I am not sure why people are so surprised. When was the last time you simply sat and felt content? Story 245. The noise prevents the dog from hearing everything. He becomes agitated when he hears sounds outside. Story 246. I am alone a lot. It makes the house feel less empty. Story 247. I don't do this anymore, but I did when I lived alone. It was like having company in the background, a little noise to fill the quiet. I didn't have it on all the time, but I left it on often. Story 248. I do that now. My computer is not in the same room as the television, but on an as-needed basis I check what is on the television to make sure I am not missing anything important. Story 249. It is creepy not to have it on. It makes my skin crawl. People who just sit there in silence make me uneasy. Why are you doing that? Are you trying to listen to what the neighbors are doing or to monitor the people who live in your house? Story 250. From the moment I was born, a television has been on perpetually. In the hospital, at my family home, and even at school, they played Arthur in the morning before classes started. The comforting sound of a television is burned into my very soul. I cannot fathom life without it. Story 251. I like background noise. It is like having music playing softly. Story 252. I live in a creepy apartment in a historic building next to a funeral home. I keep the television on or play loud music to keep the spirits away, at least enough that I do not notice until something falls over for no reason or goes missing. I also have occasional mild tinnitus and random horrible thoughts. Story 253. I need background noise. I cannot stand sitting in silence. Story 254. I cannot stand sitting in a silent room. I need a television, radio, or something playing. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.